This is another lesson for AP World History, Unit 1, Section 2. We'll be talking about the Dar al-Islam, or everywhere Islam is, or the House of Islam. We'll be focusing a lot on the Abbasid Caliphate, which arises in about the ninth century, shortly after Islam starts. It's the third iteration and growth period of Islam. And it's basically is the area that's under control of Islam. It's not a kingdom, it's really more of a concept or a construct. You have various kingdoms that exist within the Abbasid Caliphate, but this is basically wherever Islam exists as a major force. The actual map, another map that we will use is this one here, which kind of goes over details of the expansion of Islam. So a couple of things again. How did Islamic states arise and how did major religious systems shape society? And the Abbasid Caliphate is an excellent example of how states use culture to unify as a unifying factor and how they can spread then with ideas of governance that are derived through their culture, just like the Song dynasty did with Confucianism. Islam also expanded with the thoughts in the Quran. And the key thought is if we look at this map here, and then we look at this map here, is that Islam, this house of Islam, everywhere Islam is, became a hub that spread empires. Okay. And the big part of the hub of Islam is right around here in the city of Baghdad, which will become a center of learning for the entire world. This is in modern day Iraq. And you see it's kind of located in the center. Eventually, Islam is going to spread along the coast of Africa. It's going to be pushed out of this part of Spain. And it will spread into this part of the Byzantine Empire, taking Constantinople around 1450. They also will spread eastward into the northern parts of India, modern day Pakistan, where we'll be focusing a little bit this unit and next unit. So Islam is a hub and empires grow out of the thought of Islam. It does not mean that Islam did this all through military ventures, as some people would like to claim. Yes, military forces at time were involved, and they use, like any other empire, they'll use military force to maintain their legitimacy in an area of rule and fight back invaders. But it was primarily a cultural change. And the city of Baghdad becomes the center of this House of Islam. Again, it's not a state, it's basically made up of individual states, but it's an overall construct that Islam is taking over a large part of the Middle East, North Africa, and into South Asia. Islam is a growing political force with the ideas and the tenets of Islam, especially the concept of egalitarianism that all Muslims are equal under the law of Allah. And that's a big appeal to many people who had social structures like the caste system in India or other places where it was a very stratified society. And if you were in one top of the society, your life was completely different than those who were in the lower castes or sections of society. So in one area where you do have this clash of culture seen, particularly, is in South Asia. Now, Turkish people invade India in the 10th century, and they set up the Delhi Sultanate by 12,000, by 1206. And this area basically controls quite a bit of the area in India. It sets up modern day India. It takes a lot of control of the northern part of India, and then it expands further south and east, and it will encompass modern day Pakistan. It's still popular in India, and what is called Bangladesh today was East Pakistan, back when India partitions. The further spread continues culturally in East Africa and in East Africa and in West Africa through trade routes. And you can see that Islam is a very large portion of the center of the world. By 900, this is basically where Islam is, and it expands up through about 1500, reaching its real grasp and power when it does take over Constantinople and changes it into the city, which is the center of the Byzantine Empire, which had been the Roman Empire, and it then changes it into Istanbul, which is a major city in the world. So we're going to go back, we've got to minimize the screen, and let's go back to our notes. So the clash of cultures that happens in India is a big clash of ideas that do not get along at all. The Delhi Sultanate gets to northern India, and it will change form throughout history, later on becoming the Mughal Empire, which gets and consolidates more control of India, but it's always met with resistance by Hinduism, and it's a real area of conflict and a big area of culture. So why do these two religions not get along with each other, Islam and Hinduism? And they do not play well in the sandbox together, even to this day. One is monotheistic, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And Hinduism is polytheistic, with the idea of a kind of an umbrella God structure that is made up of many, 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 many gods. As a matter of fact, the soul of a person belongs and wants to get back to be part of that Godhead. In Islam, there are no images, it's seen as very profane, and they pull back on their roots of Judaism, part of that. They're an Abrahamic religion. And that was a big feature, that Abraham does not want to worship idols and just worships the unseen God. Hinduism has many idols. They want to see expressions of divinity in their day-to-day life, and it's common to have many idols in houses, temples, and all throughout uh, areas of Hinduism. Islam was based on the concept of equality before Allah, with people who are Muslim. All Muslims are equal. And Hinduism's social structure was a caste system, which we'll go into more detail in the next unit. So within India, Islam was more successful and it changes, it modifies a little bit, and it becomes Sufism, which is a syncretic. It's a mixture of when Islam crashes into Hinduism, obviously takes over and dominates Hinduism, but Hinduism creeps in, and some concepts of Hinduism that we're very familiar with, what we're going to learn about, is called the Bhakti movement, uh, creep into it and cause Sufism, which is a major, major religion in India and in the world. Sufism basically does hold the truths of Islam, basically, but it also allows for some Hindu gods to enter into the equation, and that's part of it. It also says that religion needs to be more of an emotional and a contact with God experience, rather than the more ritualistic form of Islam. So it's the syncretic. It's basically how Islam changes. Hinduism gives in and is taken over by Islam, but it penetrates a little bit and makes something kind of different. Okay, West Africa is another place, and let's go back to our map of the House of Islam. This area here is West Africa, and we'll be learning about the trade routes. And when you trade, as we have learned, you're not just trading goods, you're trading ideas, and you're trading culture and technologies and other things. So what happened is, as people started to trade with people from Dar al-Islam, they started to be won over to it, and it's won over fairly early in this different time of the Abbasid Caliphate. And it develops its own form of Islam, but it's very strong even to this day. And along the east coast of Africa, along the Swahili states, you have trade coming across the Indian Ocean and Muslim traders. They are setting up shop here, and it spreads the religion over time, even as far south as Madagascar. All right, so you have this spread of Islam through culture. It's not military at all in Africa. It's basically all cultural exchange and people buying into the idea that it offers. So merchants are a big part of the spread of Islam, trade. Muslims do back up their ships with rocket technology, which is basically an innovation given to gunpowder. Um, The paper making is really a technology that the House of Islam takes over, and this allows for stronger government, stronger record keeping, better collection of taxes and transactions, and they quickly also involve themselves, just like the Chinese, around the same time, because they're in such close contact from the Silk Road with the Chinese, into banking. Muslims were really the purveyors of knowledge, in many ways, much more than the Chinese. And one thing they got from India was the study of mathematics that led to they blended with their own mathematics, and then it spread to Europe. And you start seeing, as contact with the Middle East increases with Europe, you start seeing better designs of building, and a change also in the ways of thinking in Europe, especially in medicine and in mathematics and in engineering. But Muslims preserved the knowledge of the ancient world from the Greeks, from the ancient Indians, from other different cultures, and they added it to their own, building huge amounts of knowledge in astronomy and map making and paper making and transactions and medicine and in engineering. So one thing that does happen, which is you see that the spread of Islam in Africa, East Africa and West Africa, is very different than it is in South Asia. There, it's through trade. In India, it is through military expansion, and not again, it was not Muslim, it was Turkish military expansion, and they happened to be Muslim. That's a big distinction than saying it was a Muslim war. It was a It was basically tribes from Turkey who were warlike and had a long, long history of being warlike. Just took their religion with them, and it made their invasion into India. It was peaceful in Africa and not so peaceful in India, and the results are totally different. Islam still holds a large sway in many parts of Africa. It really does create a lot of wealth, and the places where Islam grows become large centers of learning. Timbuktu is a famous city, and you also have in the east coast of Africa many stronger city states that develop. It's not a centralized government. This is more of a concept, and you have very different forms of government. And one big factor, again, that we mentioned is the Mongols will come through this area and wreak absolute havoc on the governance of Dar al-Islam. But what happens is the Muslim governance was so good that the Mongols, just like they did in China, they just kind of kept with the system that had been working for a few hundred years, and they just said, let's just get rich. And the Mongols who are here, they basically are overcome by Islam as a culture and as a religion, and they adopt the religion in time. They don't change the religion of Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, or especially in the Middle East. They adapt to Islam and they become Islam. So that is the House of Islam. Again, it's at its height from 900 to the mid 13th century. They suffer horribly, especially Baghdad, where 200,000 people are killed by the Muslims. And one of the reasons is that the Muslims resisted the Mongols, and they said, no, that Allah will protect us. And Genghis Khan, I guess, showed them something different. And as an example, 200,000 people are basically slaughtered in Baghdad. And this breaks the back of the resistance in Islam. And the Islamic world could not believe that this was happening, that God but that Allah, God, their God, would not allow them to be victorious over these unenlightened Mongols. So that is the Abbasid Caliphate and the concept of Dar al-Islam. And I hope you have a great day.